Hi everyone, welcome this morning. It's so nice that we can all be together, even if that means we're doing that from different places. It's so cool that we can still gather around and be the church in these crazy times. So just wanted to welcome you here this morning, wherever you're watching from, and I hope you're all settled in with your cup of coffee like me, way ahead of you. And if you're a dad this morning, I hope that includes breakfast in bed, because happy Father's Day to all you fathers and father figures out there. I hope you guys have all had a good week, whatever that's looked like for you. Some of us have been lucky enough to be able to work from home. Others of us have had to return to work out there in the world this week. And others have been stuck in what they describe to me as some kind of homeschooling prison. So whatever category you're in, I really hope that your week has been good and that it has been blessed in some way. So the last time I talked, it's been a bit of a while, we looked at the topic of anxiety. And we looked how in Matthew 25, Jesus says as part of the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Do not worry, Mary Mano, this word, about your life." And we looked at how that Greek word, that Mary Mano word, was sometimes used to talk about like an intense concern that you have in a good way for someone, like for their well-being or for maybe the kingdom to advance, and that it was okay to have this intense feeling of concern when it was directed towards the right things. And but this word was also used to describe this feeling of worry when it moved outside of those healthy bounds, when that concern spilled into areas that it probably shouldn't, or it got way out of proportion. And so it transformed this concern into a worry or an anxiety about all of the issues of life, like things where our provision will come from and all of the other daily things that we can think and worry about. And we discover that this kind of worry becomes poisonous to us when it's misdirected, it's in wrong proportion, because it undermines our ability to trust in God and His goodness. And so we ask the question, ultimately, who are we going to trust to be our provider? Is it going to be God, or is it going to be worry? And ultimately, life is not about the stuff we have. It's about finding our identity as who we are in Christ and knowing in our bones that His love and acceptance is enough for us, and that He is good and He loves us to take care of us. And so that's kind of in a nutshell what we looked at last time about this idea between who will provide, worry or God, and that's kind of a choice we have to make internally about who we're going to trust. And this time I thought it would be good to look at that topic of anxiety again. It's something that's kind of at the forefront of a lot of people's thinking at the moment. I can't imagine why the world would be making us feel uncertain at all. But regardless, I thought that would be a great topic to dive into again today. And I think if most of us were being both brave and honest, we would admit that at some time in our lives we've had this struggle with anxiety. And that might even be where we are at right now. And the important thing to remember about anxiety is it's not necessarily always about what's happening externally. It can be about a perceived threat that we're reacting to. And so many times in my life when I felt anxious about things, I think this is the worst response that I could ever have, because it's not helping me at all. It's actually decreasing my ability to function properly towards the situation. But unfortunately, knowing that worry is useless does not help me at all in those situations. And it just seems to be that in life there are so many things, if we put our mind to, that we can worry about. What other people think, how they perceive us, things that might be happening at work, in our families, relationships, decisions to be made, decisions that have been made, were they the right ones, how is that going to affect us going forward? And the list could go on, right? It could be endless. And so sometimes this like baseline of anxiety we live with, we've kind of accepted as the price of modern living, that's just kind of the world we live in. It's fast paced, things move quickly, and that's just kind of how life is. But is this really the way we've been designed to live? Is this how God has created us to live? And if not, what can the Bible teach us about how to live in a world that makes us feel uncertain in a time in history where we're not really sure about what's going to happen next or what the next decade will even look like. And so I was thinking about this week, we have an analogy in horsemanship. And if we, as many of you know, I love horses. A huge passion of my life, and we have this saying, if we go out into a paddock and we get a horse and it's a little bit jittery, a little bit anxious that day, we'd say, gosh, his glass is 3/4 full today, isn't it? And so what that means, if you imagine a glass, I have visual props for today, imagine this glass is 3/4 full. So by the time we take that horse out of the paddock for whatever reason, his glass is pretty high, full of anxiety. And so anything that happens in our ride, or when we work with him, or maybe he gets scared, there's not a lot of capacity there for him to kind of absorb things before it all overflows and we have a 600 kg tantrum on our hands. And it's kind of struck me that a lot of us are living like this. We're living with our glasses half full all of the time, with this kind of base level that leaves us with not a lot of capacity for things that happen just as part of life. So maybe things change at work. Maybe we're having issues in relationships with friends or family. Maybe there are bills coming that need to be paid. Or maybe we just don't kind of know what's happening in the world around us. And so that kind of leaves us with less and less capacity if we're holding on to this, if we're keeping our glasses full. And so often I found that, and a lot of us have this really great strategy of dealing with anxiety. We just knuckle down and we push through. And sometimes there's a time you have to do that. But if that's your only strategy for dealing with anxiety, what's going to happen is your glass is going to get fuller and fuller and fuller. And you're going to have less and less room to be able to deal with things that come at you. And that kind of overflow is going to happen more and more. And so there must be a better way, right? So today I want to explore just 2 little strategies from the Bible, things that I've been trying to put into practice in my own life, of how we can live with empty glasses. So the first strategy we're going to look at is how to empty our glasses a little bit, is to realize the grace that we have for today. And so if we had to look at this cup, however full it is, and we had to measure out how much anxiety was actually about the things we were dealing with today, I would imagine if you're like me, it would be fairly minimal. Most of the stuff we worry about is not actually happening today. It's happening. We're worried it's going to happen tomorrow, or in a week, or in 3 weeks from now. And we have this kind of sense of these things like looming out on the horizon that are just moving closer and closer to us. And it can suck our focus out of the present and what's happening now, and kind of draw us into this corridor of never-ending things that are kind of coming towards us. And so Jesus has this cool little phrase in Sermon on the Mount. In fact, he has a lot of cool little phrases in Sermon on the Mount, to be fair. And he throws this one out there in Matthew 6:34. He says, "Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." And it's pretty cool. And thinking about this, Christianity is so weird, right? There's this whole thing where we're like living in terms of a revelation of what God's done for us, what he is doing for us, and what he will do for us. So there's this whole past, present, and future dynamic to God and how we experience him. And so we have this grace of God for the future, where we have this hope coming, where we know one day we will be in heaven and all things will be put right, new heavens, new earth, it's going to be great. So we have this grace of God, which is the hope of the future and the fuel that kind of drives us through the Christian life, because we know that it's coming. And we have this grace of God in the past sense, through the cross and the certainty of that future hope that he's bought for us, having restored relationship and the profound gratitude of that grace God has given us. But the only way to experience the grace of God is actually to experience in the present. So we have this hope for this future grace, this gratitude for this past grace, and this experience of God's current grace to us. And I love how the Bible doesn't pull punches. And that verse in Matthew is a great example, where he says, tomorrow worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. And so the Bible doesn't pull punches. It says you are going to face troubles. You are going to face them today, you are going to face them tomorrow, and you'll probably face them every day thereafter. And so how then do we live in this kind of world where we will face troubles every day and at the same time not worry about them? Well, let's have a look what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 9 verse 8. He says, "And God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work." And so what that means is that the grace God gives you for today, whether it feels like it or not, is actually enough for all the things you will need it for today. It's pretty crazy when you think about it. Whatever you face today, God has given you enough grace to deal with it, because it says all things at all times, having all that you need so that you abound in every good work. And so here's the catch though. When I was reading this, it sounds like there's a bit of a catch. And John Piper puts it this way. He says, tomorrow's troubles are not designed to be dealt with by today's grace. So here's what the verse doesn't say. It doesn't say that all those things you're worried about next week, tomorrow, 3 weeks from now, a month from now, that you will be given the grace that you need today to deal with the things that will happen then. You will only be given the grace that you need to deal with the things that happen today. And the promise that when the things happen tomorrow, or in a week from now, or a month from now, or in a year from now, you'll be given the grace then to deal with them then. And so there's both wonderful, frustrating, and terrifying all at the same time, because so many times in your life God's going to call you to step out beyond your comfort zone, or you'll just have things come at with you that you're like, whoa, I know this thing is coming and I know that I just can't deal with it. And the challenge in those moments is just to pause and to remember that that's okay, that you feel completely overwhelmed. You're not meant to have the grace for that thing now. But have faith that when the time comes, you will have the grace to be able to deal with that thing, because that's what God promises. And so often life is that simple, because that's what God promises. And this was mind-blowing for me, that it's okay that sometimes I feel completely out of my depth, and that the reason I feel that way is I just don't have the grace for that thing yet. And practicing the faith that when the time comes, trusting that I will be given the grace for that thing then. And so I've been trying to put this into practice more and more in my life, and I'll totally level with you that that fear still battles with faith a whole lot more than it should. And as I swing between worrying and remembering that God is big and I am small, and He loves me and He is for me and He is good and I can trust Him, it is still a battle that you have to be aware of and to be conscious of, bringing God's truth that He will give you grace for that again and again. And for me, I just need to remember that there has never been a day that I've woken up and God's grace hasn't been enough. And if you remember back in your life, I challenge you, has there ever been a time where God has failed you in this department, where you've gone, hey, your grace wasn't enough for today? And there's another little quote I have for you. It says, anxiety fools us into wasting our brief lives trying to do God's job. I liked that. It's not our job to come up with enough grace to deal with uncertain things that haven't happened yet. It's only our job to worry about the things of today, to stay present in the experience of God's grace, knowing that tomorrow when we wake up, there will be new grace waiting for us to face whatever tomorrow is going to throw at us. So this is my first strategy to living life with empty glasses, and that's to fill it up less in the first place. To resist the urge to fill it up with tomorrow's worries, and to practice the reality of living in God's grace as we experience it just one day at a time. And this will take time to cultivate in our lives. It's not like an instant flick a light switch kind of mentality change. And don't be hard on yourself as you struggle and you grow with this. But I encourage you to be self-aware, identifying how much of that glass we're filling up with tomorrow's worries. Just reflecting on it. What am I feeling anxious about? What about out of that? What is actually uncertain and unhappened yet that I should maybe tip out of my glass? And so that begs the question though, that when worries come at us and when we are pouring them out of our glass and only keeping in today's worries, where do they go? Where do we put them? They're not just going to disappear, right? Worry comes at us all the time. What are we going to do with tomorrow's worries? And so this brings us to our second strategy for living life with empty glasses. And that comes from Philippians 4:6-8. It says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." So what do we do with all that extra liquid in our glass that's to do with worries of tomorrow? We pour it out into prayer with thanksgiving. And so why do you think that it specifies prayer with thanksgiving? Like, that's quite a specific way of praying that it mentions. And thanksgiving reminds us of the goodness of God and that we can trust him. It reminds us of all the times God has come through for us in the past, all the blessings he currently gives us, and it takes us out of that future uncertainty and draws us into the certainty we have in Christ right now. And it reminds us that everything about his character and who he is points us towards his ability to take care of us and anything that the future might hold. It tells us to present our requests to God. You know, one of the most frustrating things about anxiety is it makes us feel so powerless, right? We feel like there is nothing we can do. And this just leaves with the sense of having no power. And in some sense, we are powerless over a great deal of things that happen. But the reason I love this is because we get to give all of that to the one who has all of the power. And he is for us. So we not only get to let go of those feelings of anxiety and powerlessness, we get to give them to the one who has all the power, who loves us and is for us. And that's pretty exciting. 1 Peter 7 puts it this way: cast all of your anxiety on him because he cares for you. So when things come at you, when you're tempted to feel anxiety, what do? You cast them all on God. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking it's almost like sheep drafting, like, you know, when you're sorting out sheep and there's something coming towards you and it's like, oh, that's today's worry, cool. No, that's tomorrow's worry. I'm going to cast that away into another pen where God's going to look after it. And what's really cool about that little verse is there's this promise that as we start to do this, as we start to live in the grace of God for today, while through prayer with thanksgiving, giving everything else to God, that his peace, the kind of peace that transcends all of our understanding, which makes no sense in any situation that we can think about, will come on us. In fact, it will do more than that. It will guard our hearts and it will guard our minds against any of those future worries that life will try and throw at us. And isn't that cool? Isn't that kind of what the whole world is looking for? A way to live with glasses empty of worry and anxiety and filled up with peace and assurance. And we get to live that way by the grace of God and because of all that he has done for us. And I think that's just really cool. And so they were just 2 quick little thoughts about anxiety and some strategies that we can start to cultivate in our lives, because the problem is emptying our glasses isn't just a one-time event. Life is going to keep trying to fill those up. And so how can we practice in our understanding of God, what he's done for us, and how he's designed us to work in a way that helps us live free of that, and so we can put all of that energy into pursuing God and all that he has for us. And so I'm just going to wrap up by praying. And awesome. So yeah, so God, we want to thank you that you are good. We want to thank you that you are for us and that there is nothing in this world that happens that is beyond your control, God. We thank you that we can trust you with our lives, that we can trust you with all of our tomorrows and all of our anxieties about those tomorrows, God. We want to thank you for your grace, that we have enough grace for today, God, and then when we wake up tomorrow, we will have enough grace for tomorrow too. I pray that you help us make that real in our hearts, God, that you help us put this into practice, and that as we do, we will see the reality of what your word says, that your peace that transcends all understanding will fall on us and guard our hearts and our minds. I pray for people who are struggling with anxiety at the moment, God. I pray that you would grant them a breakthrough in this, God, that you, by your Spirit, God, would meet them now, and that you would just lift that burden from them as only you can. We want to thank you that we're still able to meet together this morning, God. And we pray a blessing on every household in our community. Amen. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining in this morning, guys. I hope you were blessed in some way. I would love to hear your thoughts, your stories, your reflections, or how you have seen this in practice in your own life. So feel free to drop those in the comments below. I would really love to hear about your journey. So take care, and we will see you in some capacity next week.